Advanced Day. Section 1. English and American Literature. Part A. Great English Literature, 16th to 18th Century. Unit 1. William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare is an incredibly influential English poet and playwright who lived from 1564 to 1616. He is viewed by many as the most important writer in the English language. His plays are the most highly regarded aspect of his work because they address a number of deep philosophical issues. Additionally, they are renowned for their technical aspects. Shakespeare's sonnets are also extremely important as they represent some of the finest work in English poetry. His influence is undeniable, and his works remain as lauded today as they were during his lifetime. Shakespeare is also notable since he managed to excel in authoring both comedies and tragedies. The comedies were primarily written during the earlier part of Shakespeare's life. Using whimsical characters and many mystical elements, he presented humorous situations that spoke to the human condition, especially love. A Midsummer Night's Dream, for instance, portrays 4 Athenians in a forest inhabited by fairies. The human characters of the play interact with mystical creatures, including a satyr, and ultimately fall in love. The Twelfth Night is another one of Shakespeare's popular comedies and follows the misadventures of several characters. Besides being humorous, the play also manages to address themes concerning human identity and gender classifications. These plays and several other comedies by Shakespeare are still being widely read and performed today, over 400 years since they were authored. They have also been adapted to film. The latter half of Shakespeare's career is typified by his tragedies. They contrast with his comedies dramatically, addressing the darker aspects of human nature. Several of the tragedies are also based upon historical situations adapted for theatrical elements. Macbeth exemplifies the tragedy that can transpire from lust for power and betrayal. It is also believed to be loosely based on the actual king, also named Macbeth of Scotland. In it, a power-hungry lord manages to capture the throne by killing the monarch and many of his close friends. Eventually, the way he came to power haunts Macbeth to the brink of insanity. Other plays, like Romeo and Juliet, highlight the tragedy that can arise from seemingly insignificant situations. In Romeo and Juliet, 2 young lovers from opposite sides of a family feud fall in love with one another. Ultimately, the 2 commit suicide as a result of trying to hide their forbidden love, forcing their respective families to address their conflict and come upon the realization that the feud is petty and foolish. In addition to addressing the horrors of human vices, Shakespeare peppers his writing with deep philosophical speculation. Like his comedies, Shakespeare's tragedies are also being performed today, both on stage and on film. In addition to his success as an author, Shakespeare is also well known for his contributions to literature at large. Prior to his publication, the theater was divided into 2 distinct realms. Tudor morality plays were popular with the public. These allegorical plays use comedy and slapstick humor to portray larger moral truths, usually with a protagonist choosing a life of virtue over vice after a struggle. Meanwhile, academic plays were popular in the university setting. Based on classical Roman performances, the plays were usually performed in Latin and adhered to strict academic standards. Additionally, they addressed deeper philosophical issues that morality plays usually overlooked. Thanks to the influences of playwrights before him, academic plays and morality plays were beginning to come together. However, Shakespeare is famous for blending the 2 in a way that had never been accomplished before. While his plays still addressed moral issues, they also incorporated deeper philosophical debates and questions. Furthermore, Shakespeare included humorous situations and compelling plots in his plays, making for a truly comprehensive theatrical experience. There are a number of mysteries surrounding the popular playwright even today. Several scholars are now raising questions about his religious beliefs, sexual orientation, and even his identity. Some have argued that Shakespeare was not a single man, but a group of writers that were publishing under the same pen name. In spite of the controversy surrounding him, however, the legacy that Shakespeare has left behind is truly remarkable. The fact that his plays are still being performed 400 years after their authorship is a testament to his genius.
The metaphysical poets were a loosely structured group of British poets that wrote during the 17th century. Most of the men in the group did not know of, much less read, one another. Nonetheless, scholars have grouped them together due to their stylistic approaches and the scope of the themes in their poems. As the name would suggest, they explored many basic philosophical questions with their poetry. Rather than appealing to the emotional aspects of existence, the metaphysical poets wrote on matters of things intellectual. However, their lyrical style made even the driest of concepts engaging. The most notable of the metaphysical poets is John Donne. Donne's poetry is recognized especially for its vivid language and liberal use of clever rhetorical devices. Found throughout his verses are a number of brilliant metaphors, subtle puns, and interesting paradoxes. Much of his work employs irony as well, and reflects his cynical attitude towards human emotions. Rather than focusing on romanticized emotions, he wrote on a number of deeper, more abstract ideas surrounding love, death, and religion. In spite of the lofty, disengaged subjects of his poetry, however, Donne's writing was inextricably linked with his life. Following a timeline, one can identify profound moments when events affected the subject of his poetry. Early on, when he was single and courting, love was a central theme throughout Donne's poetry. But with the death of his wife, he began exploring issues of mortality. Near the end of his life, he became an Anglican priest and began delving into religious issues. Another of the metaphysical poets, Andrew Marvell, was the son of an Anglican clergyman. Marvell wrote lyric poetry concerning a number of issues surrounding the relationship of the body with the soul. In the poem A Dialogue Between the Soul and Body, he lays out a conversation between the body and soul which manages to retain a poetic sense of style but addresses a number of deeper, more technical philosophical issues. Likewise, another one of the metaphysical poets, George Herbert, wrote on a number of issues relevant to religion. Herbert's poetry was no doubt informed and driven by his position as a priest, but his works affected other metaphysical poets outside of the priesthood. Ultimately, through tenuous connections of influence, the metaphysical poets grew and became a considerable force in the realm of poetic literature at large. For example, a student of Herbert's, Henry Vaughan, was influential in the writings of William Wordsworth, a famous English poet. In spite of the somewhat unclear connection that the metaphysical poets have with one another, their techniques remain quite consistent. Nearly all of the metaphysical poets employed the conceit, a poetic device that used a complex extended metaphor to explain a series of concepts. John Donne, for example, compared the human soul with a drop of dew in his poem On a Drop of Dew. The metaphor would not be employed in a single line, but would usually become the dominant theme of the entire poem. Exploring the dynamics of the metaphor and its complexities was a trademark approach of the metaphysical poets. T.S. Eliot noted that the metaphysical poets were, by and large, concerned with issues that engaged the reader's mind rather than heart. The philosophical concepts at the core of metaphysical poetry were its defining characteristic, but their use of the conceit ties them together as a larger group of poets. Eliot also noted that the very nature of their poetry emphasized an interest in thought over experience, which set them apart from most other well-known poets of the following eras. The metaphysical poets have been called the anti-romantics by some. In the century following the death of most of the metaphysical poets, the Romantic movement in poetry began. The Romantics were more concerned with writing about a single experience instead of an entire concept. The influential Romantic era turned the metaphysical approach on its head. Rather than using experience as a mere device for explaining a more abstract idea using the technique of conceit, the Romantic poets focused on simply experiencing beauty and writing on that experience alone. As such, the metaphysical influence was relatively minimal in later poetry, being overshadowed by the influence of the Romantic poets.